Hello and welcome. You've reached Phantom Phone Line, the place to listen to stories of the supernatural. Season 0 features crafted tales inspired by folklore, urban legends, and classic ghost stories. So now, let's hear what's been left on the phone line. Hey, thanks for taking my call. I don't usually talk about this kind of thing, but it's been on my mind for a while now, and honestly, I just want to put it out there and see if anyone else has experienced something like it. So, this happened a couple years back, maybe late summer, early fall. My wife and I live in a pretty quiet area, not totally out in the country, but close enough that we've got some space. We've got a couple acres, a nice little backyard that opens up to a field, and beyond that, just woods. It's the kind of place where you see deer in the morning and hear coyotes at night. You know? Real peaceful. Anyway, one night, I was out back letting the dog do his thing before bed. It was late, maybe close to midnight, and the sky was clear. One of those nights where you can see every star. I was just standing there, waiting for the dog, when I noticed this light off in the field. At first, I thought maybe it was someone with a flashlight, like a neighbor cutting through, or maybe a hunter out too late. But the way it moved, that's what got me. It wasn't bobbing or shaking like someone walking with a flashlight. It was steady, smooth, almost like it was floating. I remember standing there, trying to make sense of it. It was about the size of a basketball, maybe a little bigger, and it had this soft bluish-white glow. Not blinding, but bright enough to stand out. It kind of hovered just above the ground at first, then it started shifting, slowly at first, then faster, moving side to side, like it was scanning or looking for something. My first thought was maybe it was a drone, but I didn't hear anything. No buzzing, no hum, nothing. Just the crickets and the wind. I called out, just in case it was someone messing around, maybe a kid playing with one of those fancy drones. Hey, you need help? Nothing. No response. The light just kept moving, kind of weaving through the field, but never coming any closer. And then, just like that, boom, it shot straight up into the sky. I mean, straight up, no arc, no curve, just a direct line up. And in less than a second, it was gone. Now I know how this sounds. I know what people are going to think. And trust me, I stood there for a good few minutes trying to come up with a rational explanation. Maybe it was some weird reflection? Maybe my eyes were playing tricks on me? But the dog saw it too. I know because the second that thing took off, he bolted back to the house, tail between his legs. And for weeks after that, he refused to go out in the yard at night. Wouldn't step off the porch. He'd just sit there, staring out at the field, ears up like he was waiting for something to come back. My wife thinks I just saw a shooting star, or maybe a plane catching the light at a weird angle. And look, I'd love to believe that. But I know what I saw, and I know that whatever it wasn't something normal. I've lived in this house for years. I know what planes look like. I know what satellites look like. This wasn't either of those. Since then, I haven't seen anything like it again, but I'll tell you this. I don't stand out there at night for too long anymore. And my dog? He still won't go near that field. So, yeah, that's my story. I don't know if it was some kind of drone, some natural phenomenon, or, well, something else. But I know what I saw, and I just wanted to put it out there. Maybe someone else has seen the same thing. Maybe I'm not the only one.
Growing up, we spent a lot of time at my grandma's house. It was this old place, tucked way back off a dirt road, surrounded by oak trees with moss hanging down like curtains. It was the kind of house that had stories. Some she told us, and some we just felt in the walls. It wasn't falling apart or anything, but it had that creaky, lived-in feeling, you know? And then there was the attic. The attic was off limits. At least, that's what Grandma said. Ain't nothing good up there. She'd tell us, her voice firm like she meant it. Of course, that just made us more curious. My cousins and I would sneak peeks at the narrow staircase tucked behind the kitchen door, the one that led up to it. It was steep, the kind of stairs where you could imagine something waiting for you at the top. But Grandma's word was law, so we never pushed it until that summer. We were staying there for a couple of weeks while my parents worked, and it was hot. The kind of southern summer heat that sticks to you makes you slow. At night, though, the air would cool, and the house would settle, creaking and groaning in a way that sometimes made me feel like it was alive. That's when I started hearing the tapping. The first night, I thought it was just the house, or maybe a bird on the roof, a crow cleaning his beak, or even an owl. It was this soft, rhythmic sound, like someone gently knocking on a wall. It wasn't loud enough to wake anyone else, but I heard it clear as day. I pulled the covers up and told myself it was nothing, but it kept going. Tap, tap, tap. Then it would stop, just long enough for me to start thinking I imagined it before starting up again. Eventually, I fell asleep, but the next morning I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. I didn't say anything at first. I figured maybe it was just me. But a couple of nights later, it started up again. Same sound, same soft, deliberate rhythm. This time, I mentioned it at breakfast. "Grandma, you ever hear tapping in the walls at night?" She paused just for a second before waving me off. "Old houses make noise, baby. Don't pay it no mind." But the way she said it didn't convince me. It felt like she knew something she wasn't saying. That day, my cousins and I were playing outside when Marcus brought up the attic. "You know Grandma's hiding something up there," he said, his voice low like he was sharing a secret. "What if it's treasure?" That got everyone's attention. We started coming up with wild theories. Hidden money, old love letters, maybe even something spooky. By the end of the afternoon, we'd worked ourselves up enough to decide we had to check it out. That night, after Grandma went to bed, we crept down the hall to the attic stairs. Marcus led the way, flashlight in hand, and I followed close behind. The air got heavier as we climbed, like it was thicker somehow, harder to breathe. At the top, the door to the attic was closed, and when Marcus turned the handle, it creaked loud enough to make all of us freeze. I half expected Grandma to come storming up after us, but she didn't. The attic was darker than I thought it would be, even with the flashlight. The beam cut through the shadows, landing on old trunks, dusty furniture, and a few boxes piled in the corner. It didn't seem like much at first, just old stuff nobody cared about anymore. But then the tapping started. It was louder up there, sharper, like it was coming from inside the walls. We all froze, staring at each other, too scared to move. The tapping didn't stop this time. It just kept going, like it was circling us. Marcus whispered, "It's just a mouse or something," but his voice shook. I wanted to believe him, but deep down, I knew this wasn't a mouse. Then the air changed. It felt colder, and there was this smell, like old wood and something faintly sweet, but not in a good way. I can't explain it, but I felt like we weren't supposed to be there, like the attic itself didn't want us there. The tapping got louder, and I swear it started to sound like a pattern, like someone was knocking in a rhythm I couldn't quite understand. That's when we heard it. A whisper. It was faint, but we all heard it, like someone was speaking just out of earshot. Marcus dropped the flashlight, and it rolled across the floor, leaving us in almost total darkness. "We need to go," I said, my voice barely more than a whisper. Nobody argued. We bolted down the stairs so fast we nearly tripped over each other, slamming the door behind us. We never went back up there. I tried asking Grandma about it again, but she just looked at me, her face serious, and said, "Some things are better left alone." I didn't push it after that. Whatever was in that attic, it wasn't for us to mess with. Even now, years later, I still think about that night. I don't know what we heard, and I don't know if I want to know. I never had a chance to visit that house again. But every now and then, when I'm in a quiet room and I hear a faint tapping sound, I get this chill. It's probably just a mouse or maybe a bird on the roof, but after what we experienced in the attic, I can't shake the thought that it's like a reminder that some places, some things don't let go of you so easily.
Hey, it's me again. Yeah, the guy with the weird floating light in the field. I told myself I wasn't going to call back, that I was done thinking about it, but something else happened. Something I can't ignore. I haven't seen the light again. Not exactly, but I've been hearing a sound. A low hum, real faint, just at the edge of my hearing. You know when a TV is on mute, but you can still kind of hear that high-pitched frequency? It's like that, except lower, almost like an engine idling way off in the distance. At first, I thought it was just my ears playing tricks on me. Heck, I even looked up symptoms, but the thing is, it only happens outside, always around the same time of night, right around 11 p.m. It started maybe a week ago. I was letting the dog out before bed, as usual, only earlier now than I used to. I was standing on the back porch when I noticed it. This low vibration, more felt than heard, like the kind of thing that makes your chest feel a little tight. I thought maybe it was coming from the highway a couple miles off, or maybe some kind of farm equipment running late. But when I walked back inside, it stopped. Dead silence. That's when I started paying more attention. The next night, same thing. I stepped outside. There it was, that hum, like it was seeping into the air itself. A real low, almost electrical vibration, just on the edge of hearing. At first, I thought maybe I was imagining it, or maybe it was just background noise, wind turbines in the distance, or maybe the highway a few miles off. But no, it only happens outside, always at the same time of night. I walked a little toward the field, just far enough to see over the tall grass, and it seemed to get stronger. My dog was with me. Now, you might remember, he never liked that field. The night I saw the light, he wouldn't even step off the porch. But now, he just sat there, staring, his ears twitching like he could hear something I couldn't. That was the first time I really got spooked. Because, see, dogs don't lie. You know what I mean? They don't imagine things. If they hear or see something, it's real. By the fourth night, the hum had gotten louder. Not a lot, but just enough that it wasn't a question of whether or not I was imagining it. And then, something changed. A heavy fog had rolled in. Not unusual for this time of year, but this one was thick. Real thick. The kind that clings low to the ground, making everything look strange and stretched out, like you're wrapped up in it. I walked out like I had been, just to see if the sound was there. It was. Stronger than before. I stepped off the porch, took a few steps toward the field, and that's when I saw it. Not the same floating light from before. This was different. A beam, a dim, white-blue streak cutting through the mist, low to the ground, but it rotated, like a lighthouse beam turning where no lighthouse should be. A few feet off the ground at most. It moved slowly, sweeping across the field, disappearing into the fog before coming back around again. I wouldn't have even noticed it if not for the mist, like it was only visible when the air was just right, like a laser cutting through dust. And that hum? It wasn't just steady anymore. It was pulsing. Each time the beam passed, the sound would swell, low, deep, almost mechanical, and then fade as the light moved away. Over and over, in perfect rhythm. I just stood there, watching. I don't know how long I was out there, maybe a minute, maybe longer. But the second I really focused on it, the second I thought, what the heck is this? It stopped. The beam didn't flicker out, it didn't fade, it was just gone. 1 second it was there, turning through the mist, and the next, the fog was just fog again. The hum cut out too, leaving only dead silence. No wind, no crickets, nothing. I don't know what I saw. I don't know if it's the same thing from before or something new entirely. But I know this. Something is still out there. I just don't know what it is. That was the last time I saw anything or heard the hum. Thankfully, it's been peaceful since. The deer are out in the fields in the morning, and the crickets chirp at night. Real calm. But I still wonder what that thing was, and if it'll be back.
One summer, I went to stay with my Aunt Denise for a couple of weeks while my parents dealt with their crumbling marriage. I wasn't an easy kid to love then. My parents' relationship problems had placed a strain on me, and while it wasn't an excuse, it had made me a bit of a troubled child. I got into trouble sometimes. Well, I got into trouble a lot. I didn't respect what people told me, even if it was for my own good. I didn't care. I did what I wanted to. Eventually, people had had enough of my antics, and I found myself shipped off to the country. And Aunt Denise lived in the country, way out in the country, surrounded by woods that seemed to stretch on forever. I knew she liked me enough, but I wasn't thrilled about being so far from civilization. No Wi-Fi, no friends, and nothing but trees and dirt roads as far as the eye could see. She warned me the first day, "Don't go too far into the woods, baby. Those trees have a way of turning you around, and it's easy to get lost." She said it like it was just a practical bit of advice, but the way she kept glancing out the window made me think there was more to it. I didn't ask questions, though. I figured it was just more chatter I could ignore. For the first week, I was still mad about losing access to the life I had left behind. Even if it was crummy, it was all I knew. I was bored. To entertain myself, I snuck out of the house and wandered around a bit. Being unfamiliar with the area and the countryside in general, I still stuck to the little paths around the house, staying close enough to hear her call me for dinner. Even if I got turned around a bit, her voice was my lifeline back. But one afternoon, curiosity got the better of me. I decided to explore a bit deeper. The air was heavy that day, humid and sticky, and a thick fog had rolled in, making the woods look like something out of a fairy tale. It even had a smell to it, and it felt quiet, too quiet. No birds, no rustling leaves, just my footsteps crunching on the dirt trail. After about 20 minutes of walking, I realized the fog had gotten even thicker. I could barely see 10 feet ahead of me. That's when I heard it, a faint noise, barely audible. I stopped and listened, but it went silent. I figured it was just some animal and kept walking. But then it came again, this time louder and closer, a raspy cough like someone clearing their throat to speak. "Hello?" I called out, feeling a little silly. My voice sounded muffled, swallowed up by the mist. That's when I saw it, a shadowy figure standing just off the trail. A person, but something about it felt off. It was tall and thin, its arms too long for its body, and its head tilted slightly like it was studying me. "Aunt Denise?" I called out, half hoping it was just her somehow. But the figure didn't respond. It just stood there, motionless. I took a step back, and as I did, the figure took a step forward. Its movements were jerky, like it wasn't used to walking. I kept looking through the swirling fog, trying to make out what I was looking at. That's when I noticed something that sent a chill down my spine. Its face, or what should have been its face, was blank. No eyes, no nose, no mouth. Just smooth, pale skin. Panic set in, and I turned to run back the way I came. But the fog was so thick now, I couldn't tell which direction was which. Every tree looked the same, and the trail I'd been following was gone. The coughing noise started again, louder and faster, echoing all around me. Then, out of the corner of my eye, I saw her. Aunt Denise, standing just a few feet away, looking calm and completely out of place in the foggy woods. Relief washed over me. "Aunt Denise, thank God I'm lost!" I ran toward her, but as I got closer, something wasn't right. Her posture was stiff, her head tilted at the same unnatural angle as the figure I'd seen before, and when she spoke, her voice sounded wrong, like it was trying to mimic her but couldn't quite get it right. "You shouldn't be here," she said, her gnarled lips barely moving. That's when I saw her, but it wasn't her. Her face was stretched, her mouth elongated and twisted in a way that curled unnaturally. My stomach dropped. This wasn't my aunt. I stumbled backward, tripping over a root and landing hard on the ground. The thing took a step toward me, its mouth and lips twisting, as if it was trying to form words but couldn't decide which ones. Then, just as suddenly as it had appeared, it stopped. It tilted its head again, almost like it was listening to something, and then melted back into the mist. I didn't wait to see if it would come back. I scrambled to my feet and ran, ignoring the branches that tore at my arms and face. I don't know how, but somehow I found my way back to the house. Aunt Denise was sitting on the porch when I got there, sipping sweet tea like nothing had happened. "You okay, baby?" she asked, her face full of concern. I wanted to tell her everything, but the words wouldn't come out. Instead, I just nodded and went inside. That night I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that curled face. The next morning, Aunt Denise sat me down at the kitchen table. "You went into the deep woods, didn't you?" she said, her voice soft but firm. I nodded. She sighed. "There's things out there that don't belong. That's why I told you to stay close." I never went back into those woods, and to this day I don't know what I saw out there. Was my aunt in a costume trying to teach me a lesson? Was it some kind of creature? A spirit? I don't even want to guess. I didn't stay with her for long, but sometimes, at night, I still dream about that forest, smell that thick fog, and hear that horrible, raspy cough ring out, echoing against the trees.
I've never told anyone this before, but I knew this show might be the right place to share it. Something happened to me, and I've never really known what to make of it. This happened a few years ago when I went camping with some friends. It was supposed to be a weekend of hiking, campfires, and just disconnecting, you know? We picked this spot way out in the middle of nowhere. No cell service, no people for miles. It was perfect, or so we thought. The first night was normal. We set up camp, made dinner, told a bunch of dumb stories around the fire, you know, the usual stuff. But when we went to bed, I started noticing something strange. Around midnight, I woke up because the woods were too quiet. You ever hear that saying about how when it gets too quiet, it means a predator's nearby? It was like that. No crickets, no rustling leaves, no wind, just this dead silence. That's when I saw it, a faint light glowing through the trees. At first, I thought maybe it was another group of campers or a ranger making their rounds, but it wasn't moving like a flashlight. It was more like a soft pulse, bright, then dim, bright, then dim. It was almost hypnotic, like it was drawing me toward it. I wanted to wake up my friends, but part of me felt stupid, like it's probably nothing. So I just watched it from inside my tent until I fell back asleep. The next morning, I mentioned it casually, like, hey, did anyone else see a light last night? But everyone shook their heads and laughed it off. The second day, we finished the night off with a round of drinks and then figured we'd turn in. And later that night is when it happened again. Since I had been drinking, I woke up and had to pee, and around the same time as the night before, I saw the same pulsing light. But this time, it was closer. I could see it moving through the trees, like it was weaving its way toward our camp. I told myself it had to be some kind of optical illusion, maybe moonlight reflecting off something. I didn't even unzip my tent to look. But the third night, that's when things got weird. I woke up around 1:30 or 2 a.m., feeling groggy, and the light was back. But this time, it wasn't off in the distance. It was right there, in the clearing, maybe 50 or 100 feet from our tents. It wasn't like any light I'd ever seen. It didn't cast shadows, and it didn't really illuminate anything around it. It was just there, floating, pulsing. I couldn't take it anymore. I unzipped my tent just a little to get a better look. That's when I realized the light wasn't random. It was moving in a circle, almost like it was searching for something. And then it stopped, dead still. And I swear it felt like it was looking at me. I froze. I didn't breathe, didn't blink. I just stared at this thing, and it stared back, if you can even call it that. And then, just as quickly as it had come, it vanished. No fading out, no floating away, just gone. The next morning, I told my friends I wasn't feeling well and wanted to pack up and leave. They thought I was being dramatic, but I didn't care. I couldn't spend another night out there. A few months later, I did some digging into the area. Turns out, there were stories, old ones, about strange lights in those woods. People called them corpse lights or spirit lanterns. Supposedly, they show up where someone died or where something terrible happened. I don't know if I believe in all that. I don't know if my so-called friends back then were pranking me, but what I do know for sure is that I haven't been camping since.
Hi there, this is something I've never been able to explain, and I thought maybe it's time to finally share it. My friend and I used to explore this old abbey complex just on the outskirts of town. It was mostly ruins, fallen stone, and overgrown ivy, but for some reason it was our favourite spot. It had this hauntingly peaceful atmosphere, a place frozen in time. The kind of place where you'd expect to hear a creepy whisper or feel a chill, but at the same time, you felt at ease. Anyway, this particular afternoon was a bit different. The clouds were thick overhead, casting the whole area in a dim, almost eerie light. We'd been there for a while already, just hanging out in what used to be the main hall. All around us were remnants of old stone arches and crumbled columns, but it still had a kind of majesty to it, even in its ruin. I remember sitting near the back wall, next to this giant fallen pillar, when I noticed something strange. The shadows on the walls weren't right. You know how shadows are supposed to stay still? These, they didn't. There were no trees or branches nearby to cast them, so I couldn't figure out where they were coming from. But these shadows, they moved. It started slow, almost imperceptible, but then it became clearer. There were figures walking along the walls, but they didn't look like the usual shifting shadows you'd expect with the light changing. These were like people, full shapes though faint, slowly walking past the columns as though the abbey was still whole, as though it was still being used. They didn't look like ghosts, not exactly. They were more like shadows of people or echoes of something from the past. I was frozen at first, thinking I was imagining it. I glanced at my friend and I saw that she'd noticed too. She didn't say anything at first, just stared, her eyes wide. I felt my stomach drop. I knew she saw it too, and I wasn't just going crazy. The figures seemed to move along the walls, almost walking in some sort of procession, like they were doing something, walking through the hall as though they belonged there, as if the place hadn't fallen to ruin at all. The odd thing was, it didn't feel scary, just strange. It was like we were witnessing something we shouldn't be seeing, some forgotten moment in time. The figures' shadows didn't acknowledge us. They just moved, walked past the same old arches, disappeared into the air as if they were part of the building itself, of something much older. Minutes felt like hours. We didn't move, we didn't speak. We just watched, hypnotized by these shadowy figures until they finally started to fade, their edges becoming less defined, until there was nothing left but the usual crumbling walls of the abbey. We didn't speak about it immediately. Honestly, neither of us knew what to say. We both felt like we had just stepped into something, some kind of time slip or a moment from the past. Maybe it was a memory of the abbey's former glory before it had fallen apart. Or maybe we were seeing the remnants of something that once happened there, something lost to time. It was years later that we finally talked about it after a pint, and even then, it didn't seem real. We laughed it off as some trick of the light, or maybe we both had the same hallucination. But the more we thought about it, the more we couldn't shake the feeling that we'd seen something genuine, something that couldn't be explained by shadows or imagination. It was like we had briefly slipped into the past, just for a moment, like the abbey had briefly come back to life. And you know what? Even now, every time I think about that old abbey, don't envision it as the ruins we used to hang out in, but as a complete, lived-in building, a place where I'm expecting to see those same figures, moving along the walls as if they were still there. Anyway, that's my story. I've never been able to fully explain it, but maybe there's something to it, you know? A glimpse into another time, or maybe something else entirely, I don't know. Thanks for listening. Either way, I'm glad I could share my tale.
Hi there, I don't know if this counts as paranormal, but it's something I've never been able to explain. It happened when I was about 12 years old during one of our summer visits to my uncle's village. It's a small place surrounded by thick forests that seemed to stretch forever. The kind of place where you can hear your own thoughts because it's so quiet. The villagers had all these stories about the forest, about spirits, jinns, and other things you shouldn't mess with. My uncle was always warning us, saying, the forest is alive in ways you can't understand. Don't take it lightly. But you know how kids are. We'd laugh it off and play outside anyway. One night after dinner, my cousins and I were sitting on the veranda when we heard it, the sound of drumbeats coming from the forest. It wasn't festival season, so there shouldn't have been anyone out there playing music. The beats were rhythmic, steady, and they sounded like they were getting closer. At first, we thought it might just be someone from the village, but my uncle came outside and told us to get back inside immediately. He didn't explain why, but the look on his face was enough to convince us. He shut the door and bolted it, which was strange because he usually never did that. He liked to keep things open so there was a cooling breeze blowing through the whole house, but not that day. Of course, we couldn't let it go. Later that night, when everyone else had gone to bed, my cousins and I snuck out. We followed the sound, our cheap flashlights cutting through the darkness as best as they could. The drumbeats seemed to guide us deeper into the forest, and for some reason, we felt compelled to keep going. It was as if the sound was pulling us in. We walked for what felt like ages until we reached a clearing. The drumbeats stopped. There was no one there, just trees, and an eerie silence that made the hair on my arms stand up. And then we felt it. It's hard to explain, but it felt like we were being watched. Like there were eyes on us from every direction, even though we couldn't see anything. My cousin whispered, "We need to go," and that's when we heard the sound, the whispering. It wasn't coming from one place. It was all around us, low and indistinct, like 100 voices speaking at once. We didn't wait to figure out what it was. We turned and ran as fast as we could back to the house. When we told my uncle what happened, he didn't yell at us for disobeying him. He just said, "You're lucky you came back." When we pressed him, he wouldn't explain. He only said, "The forest has its own rules. Don't go looking for things that don't want to be found." I've never gone back to that village. My parents moved for work not long afterwards, but sometimes, late at night, I still think about those drumbeats and the whispering. I don't know what we stumbled into, a local family celebration, a ritual, or something darker, something supernatural. I don't think I'll ever really know.
So, I guess I should start by saying that I was never one to believe in anything unusual. I mean, I work in finance. Everything's about numbers and logic, right? But this happened to me on a business trip a couple of years ago, and I still can't shake it. It was my first time traveling for work. I was in my late 20s, fresh off a big promotion, and I had just moved to a new city, so things were hectic. My company asked me to head out of town to attend a week-long conference, and at first, I was excited. It felt like a big deal, everything I'd been working for. But it also meant I'd be away from home for a few days, which honestly I wasn't thrilled about. I was already buried in work, but I knew this was part of the deal. So, I packed my bags and made my way to the hotel. The place seemed nice enough. Nothing fancy, but it had the kind of understated elegance you'd expect for a business trip. Clean-looking lobby, fresh paint on the walls, and inoffensive art hung up. I checked in, got my key, and headed up to my room. After a long day of meetings, I was exhausted, but I still had a lot of emails to catch up on. So I ended up sitting at the little desk in my room, typing away on my laptop, when I first heard it. At first, I thought it was just the sound of the building, creaking floors or maybe a guest walking by in the hallway. But it wasn't like that. It was footsteps. Steady, deliberate footsteps pacing outside my door. It felt odd because I hadn't heard anyone come up or down the hallway earlier, and it was late enough that I figured most people were probably in their rooms by then. I thought maybe it was just someone else working late, like me, or a guest who couldn't sleep. But the pacing didn't stop. It went on for what felt like a long time. 10 minutes, maybe longer. It wasn't a quick walk either. The person was moving back and forth, almost like they were trying to decide whether to knock on the door or just pass by. I remember feeling this weird, creeping sensation in my chest, like something wasn't quite right. I finally couldn't take it anymore, so I stood up, walked over to the door, and opened it, fully expecting to see someone pacing down the hall. But there was no one. Nothing. Just an empty hallway stretching out in both directions. The lights in the corridor were dim, and the air felt a little colder than it should have been. That was probably just the hotel's old system, right? Still, I felt a weird shiver run down my spine. I didn't know what to make of it, but I brushed it off. Maybe it was just my nerves. I was under a lot of pressure with work. That night, I tried to sleep, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. Every time I closed my eyes, I imagined someone standing just outside the door, watching me.
but I eventually drifted off, exhausted from the day. The next few nights were the same. I'd hear the footsteps again, pacing outside my room, sometimes louder, sometimes softer, but always there. I'd open the door and there'd be no one. It became a routine. The pacing would start late at night, usually after midnight, and I'd stand by the door, listening. There was something about the sound that made me uneasy, even though I couldn't see anyone. I convinced myself that I was just overtired, that I was hearing things or imagining it, but it was getting harder to ignore. One night, I was working late again, trying to meet a deadline, when I heard something different. Instead of the usual pacing, I heard what sounded like a soft scraping noise, like something dragging along the carpet outside my room. I froze. The noise continued for several minutes, and then there was a sudden thud, like something or someone had dropped something heavy in the hallway. I shot up from my chair and rushed to the door. I opened it, but there was no one. The hallway was completely still. The lights flickered a little, but otherwise it was empty. At that point, I felt this pressure in my chest, like I was being watched. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong with that hotel, something beyond the usual creaks and groans of an old building. But I had a meeting first thing in the morning, and I didn't want to freak myself out over nothing, so I went to bed, though it wasn't easy to sleep. But the weirdest part came a few nights later. I had just finished a long day and was getting ready to turn in when I saw something. It was subtle, but I couldn't ignore it. As I was about to close the door to my room, I saw a shadow pass under the crack. The shadow moved across the floor, slow and steady, like someone had walked past. I froze, staring at the space under the door. But when I opened it, no one was there. I quickly checked both ends of the hallway, and once again, it was completely empty. I don't know why, but that was the moment it hit me. There was something not right about that place. The air felt different, and I felt an overwhelming sense of being watched. I tried to convince myself I was just tired, that the stress of being away from home had gotten to me. But after that, I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone in that hotel. Even when I checked out, I remember looking over my shoulder as I walked down the hallway, half expecting to see someone standing in the shadows. I don't know if it was the hotel itself or if I just happened to be in the wrong place at the wrong time, but I've never had that experience again, and honestly, I don't want to. It was like I was in the presence of something else, something that was trying to get my attention, or maybe just wanted to let me know it was there. I never mentioned it to anyone at work, and I've tried to forget about it. But it still creeps into my mind sometimes when I stay in hotels or old buildings. I guess I just don't look at things the same way anymore. Some things just can't be explained.
Good evening, sir. I hope you're listening to this because I need to get it off my chest. This thing happened years ago, during my NYSC, that is the mandatory service program for graduates in my country. I was sent to a small town in the South Dot. They send you to one remote place where you don't know anybody. You just manage yourself until it's over. I was lucky. I got a decent place to stay. A small one-room apartment in a compound not too far from the school where I was posted. It was basic bed, fan, small table, but it was enough. I didn't even mind that NEPA, the power supplier there, took light most of the time. It was peaceful enough during the day. The kind of quiet you only get in the countryside. But at night, that was different. Very different. The first time I heard it, I thought I was imagining things. It had been a long day at school, teaching kids who barely listen and struggling to mark exercise books by candlelight because, of course, there was no electricity. I was exhausted. The heat didn't help either, those nights where the air is so still, so heavy, that even breathing feels like work. I had just settled into bed when, thud, a single footstep. I sat up immediately. Listened. Silence. Then another step. Thud. Dash, slow. Deliberate. Heavy. I turned on my phone's flashlight and swept it around the room. Nothing. But the sound, it hadn't come from inside. It had come from above me. On the roof. Now, let me explain something about this roof. It wasn't one of those tin or corrugated iron roofs you see in old houses. No. It was flat concrete, like an extra floor that was never built. No overhangs, no attic space, no access. And yet, someone was walking up there. I told myself it was an animal. A cat, maybe. A big lizard. Something. I forced myself to ignore it and go to sleep. The next night, it happened again. This time, I was already on edge, listening. It started the same way, a heavy step, followed by another. But this time, I paid closer attention. The footsteps weren't random. They started from one corner of the roof and moved, step by step, across the length of my ceiling. Then, they stopped. Silence. Then they started again, walking back the other way. I held my breath. It was pacing. It wasn't an animal. It wasn't the wind. It was something. And the worst part, it never left the roof. It didn't jump down. Didn't move away. Just walked. Stopped. Walked again. I barely slept that night. By the third night that this thing happened, I was done pretending. I decided to go outside, to check if maybe, somehow, somebody had climbed up there. Maybe it was a prank, some kids messing around. I needed to see for myself. I stepped out into the compound, my phone's torchlight cutting through the darkness. The place was silent. Too silent. Not even the usual night sounds of crickets or distant voices. I turned my light to the roof. Nothing. No ladder. No tree. No sign of anything. But the moment I stepped back inside, the footsteps started again. I froze. My heart was pounding so hard I could hear it. I wanted to run, to leave the room and sleep somewhere else, anywhere else. But where would I go? The compound gate was locked for the night. I sat on my bed, gripping my phone, listening. The footsteps continued for what felt like hours. Moving, stopping, moving again. And then a whisper. Not words. Not something I could understand. Just a low, dry sound, like wind passing through cracked earth. But it came from above. I don't remember falling asleep, but somehow I did. Maybe exhaustion took over. Maybe I just shut down. The next morning, I told my neighbor. An older man, one of the long-time tenants in the compound. I expected him to laugh, to tell me I was hearing things. But he just gave me a look. The kind that made my skin crawl. It has been working there for years, he said. I laughed nervously, thinking he was joking. What do you mean? He shook his head. Some things, you don't question. That was all he said. That was all he needed to say. The nights after that were worse. I kept telling myself that I could live with it, that it was just footsteps and nothing more. I mean, it wasn't like it was trying to get inside, right? But that was before the knocking started. It was a few nights later. Same routine, me in bed, too nervous to sleep, listening to the footsteps. But this time, just as the pacing stopped, a knock. Right above me. Not loud. Not a banging. Just 3 soft, deliberate taps against the concrete ceiling. I couldn't move. The air in my room felt tight, thick. I gripped my blanket like it could somehow protect me. Then another 3 knocks. It wasn't asking to come in. It was testing something. That night, I packed my bag. I'd had enough. The next morning, I'd speak to the landlord, find another place. But before I could leave, something else happened. Sometime in the middle of the night, as I lay there, too afraid to sleep, I heard my door handle rattle. Slow, quiet. Not like someone trying to break in. Like someone testing the lock. I held my breath, squeezed my eyes shut. My door was locked. I was sure of it. But I felt something in the room. The air was colder than before. The silence had changed. And then a shadow moved across the dim light coming from my window. I didn't look. I couldn't look. I buried my head under the blanket, gripping my phone so tightly my fingers ached. At some point, exhaustion won. And when I woke up, it was morning. I left that apartment within the week. Told the school I found somewhere closer. Paid extra just to get out of that compound. The new place was smaller, stuffier, but I didn't care. As long as it had a proper roof. I never told anyone else in the area. What would I say? That something walked my roof at night. That it knocked. That I felt it in my room. Even now, years later, I still don't understand. But sometimes, on still, heavy nights when the air feels wrong, and I can't quite G to sleep, on nights like that, I think about what happened. I think about that sound. Thud. Pacing. Stopping. And the waiting.
Howdy, friends. I don't usually do this, but I was listening to this show the other night, and something about it stuck with me. A guy called in talking about hearing something in the woods. Something weird. And it made me think of something that happened to me. Something I haven't really talked about. I don't know. Maybe if I say it out loud, I'll stop thinking about it so much. So this was a few summers ago, mid-July. I was supposed to go on this trip with, well, doesn't matter who. But let's just say plans changed. You ever have a breakup where you know it was the right call, but that doesn't make it any easier? Where you feel like you should be relieved, but all you can think about is everything that went wrong? Yeah, that kind. So I did what I always do when I need to clear my head. I packed up, picked a trail, and went deep into the woods. It wasn't my first solo trip, not by a long shot. I grew up hiking and camping, spent more nights in a tent than I can count. I know how to handle myself out there. I wasn't looking for trouble, just space. Time to get away from everything. No cell service, no noise, just miles of forest stretching in every direction. I had a 3-day route planned. Not crazy remote, but remote enough. The kind of place where you might pass a couple of hikers on day 1, but by day 2, it's just you and the trees. And that's exactly what I wanted. The first day went fine. Hot, but not unbearable. I made good time, found my first campsite near a lake with one of those perfect postcard views. Glass, still water, pine trees lining the edge, the sky turning gold as the sun set. I built a fire, cooked some food, sat on a rock near the shore, just listening. Loons out on the water. Wind in the trees. The kind of quiet that makes you realize how loud your life usually is. Then, as the last bit of light faded, knock, knock, knock. I turned, frowning. It wasn't close, but not far either. Somewhere across the lake in the trees. A woodpecker? But it didn't sound right. Too deep, too solid. Like someone knocking on a tree trunk with a branch or a rock. I waited. A minute later, 3 more knocks. Same exact rhythm. It felt weird, but I brushed it off. Trees shift, branches fall. Could have been anything. I slept fine that night. Next morning, I packed up and hiked deeper into the woods. The air was thick and humid, the kind of heat that clings to you no matter how much shade you find. By midday, I was sweating through my shirt, swatting at mosquitoes, just focused on getting to my next site. And that's why at first, I didn't even register it. Somewhere along the trail, maybe late afternoon, I heard it again. Knock, knock, knock. This time, it was farther ahead of me. I stopped, listening. It was faint, distant, almost swallowed by the rustling leaves and the drone of insects. I told myself it was nothing, just a weird coincidence. But an hour later, when I reached my next campsite, knock, knock, knock. Now it was closer. Not right on top of me, but close enough that I knew it wasn't an accident. Something was out there. I told myself it was another hiker. Had to be. Maybe someone messing around, knocking on trees. But why wouldn't they say something? Why wouldn't I hear footsteps? Voices? As the sun set, I built my fire, forced myself to eat, tried to enjoy the quiet, but my stomach felt tight. I kept catching myself looking at the trees, expecting I don't even know what. That night, I barely slept. I woke up feeling stiff and exhausted, like I hadn't actually rested at all. But I forced myself to pack up, shouldered my gear, and hit the trail. The hike that day was harder. More elevation, winding trails, my legs burning with every step. I tried to focus on that, on pushing forward, one foot after another. But the farther I went, the stronger the feeling got. That feeling of being watched. I kept glancing over my shoulder, scanning the trees. Nothing. No movement, just the endless green stretching in every direction. But by late afternoon, I heard it again. Closer. Knock, knock, knock. This time, it wasn't ahead of me. It was behind. I stopped, waited. The air felt thick, heavy, like the whole forest was holding its breath. Then knock, knock, knock. From the side of the trail. Too close. I didn't call out, didn't move. Just stood there, my pulse pounding in my ears. And then another set of knocks. Not from the same spot, from the other side of the trail. Like a reply. I moved fast after that. Practically jogged the last few kilometers to my next site, set up my tent with shaking hands, built the biggest fire I could manage. My legs were sore, my lungs burning, but none of that mattered, because I wasn't alone out there. The knocks started again as soon as the sun went down. Closer. Deliberate. I grabbed my bear spray, a useless thing against whatever was out there, and sat with my back to the fire, eyes on the dark. I didn't sleep at all that night. I don't know when the knocking stopped. Maybe sometime around dawn. I just know that the second there was enough light to see, I was packed and moving. I didn't eat. Didn't rest. Just hiked. Fast. As fast as I could without tripping over my own feet. The whole way back, I felt it. That weight behind me. But I didn't look. By mid-afternoon, I made it to the trailhead. My car was still there. The world felt normal again. But I just sat there for a long time, gripping the steering wheel, heart still hammering in my chest. Anyway, that's my story. Take it or leave it. But I know what I heard. I know what I felt. What I don't know. What it was. A person? Maybe. But what kind of psycho hikes miles into the woods just to knock on trees in the exact same pattern, night after night? Never saying a word? An animal? No way. I know what lives in those woods. Nothing does that. And if it wasn't a person, if it wasn't an animal, then what was it? I don't go hiking alone anymore. And if you ever hear knocking in the woods, don't knock back. Just leave. All right, I'm going to hang up now. Stay safe out there. Thanks for listening.
All right there. Hi. I'm not usually the one telling tales. Not properly. Not like this. I've mentioned it a few times, mostly to friends, after a few pints, when you don't mind scaring yourself a little. But every time I start, I end up brushing past the details, laughing it off before I think too hard about it. But maybe talking about it here will help. So, this happened a few years back when I was staying with my uncle out west, deep in the countryside. Proper middle of nowhere stuff. His place was an old stone cottage, low ceilings, whitewashed walls, the kind of place that always smelled faintly of peat smoke. Even in the summer, the fire never truly went out. Nights out there were a different kind of dark, heavy, absolute. No streetlights, no glow from a nearby town, just the stars, and the endless stretch of fields and bogland swallowing up the roads. The bog was always there. You didn't really think about it. Just part of the landscape, the way the hills or the hedgerows were. It stretched out behind my uncle's land, miles of reeds and still water, shifting under its own weight. They'd put wooden planks down in some places, a kind of narrow path for walkers, but people didn't go out there much. Not unless they had a reason to. I never gave it much thought. Until the night I had to walk home alone. I'd been visiting a mate in the next village over, stayed later than I meant to. No buses, no lifts, and the only way back was on foot. About a 40-minute walk, most of it on quiet country roads, except for the stretch that ran alongside the bog. Now, I'd walked that way plenty of times before, but never that late. Never when the sky was smothered with clouds, the air thick with the kind of damp that settles in your bones. It was one of those nights where sound carries funny, every little noise seemed too loud, my own footsteps bouncing off the hedgerows like someone was walking right behind me. I remember pulling my jacket tighter, jamming my hands in my pockets, and telling myself to stop being stupid. Just a road. Just another walk home. Then, about halfway along the bog path, I heard it. Footsteps. Not mine. A second pair, just behind me, just out of sync enough to be wrong. I stopped. The sound stopped. The silence that followed wasn't normal. It wasn't just the quiet of the countryside at night, it was dead. No wind, no rustling in the hedges, no distant call of an owl. Just me, standing on a damp road, my breath too loud in the stillness. I told myself it was nothing. A trick of the sound, maybe my own footsteps echoing back at me. I took another step. And something else did too. Not on the road. In the bog. Off to the left, where the reeds grew thickest. I swung my torch that way, the beam cutting through the dark. The wet glisten of water, the tangled mess of reeds, the wooden walkway stretching off into the distance. But nothing else. Still, I could feel it. That prickling sense of being watched. I tried to shake it off, forced myself to walk on, a little faster this time. I told myself I was imagining things. That's what you do, isn't it? You make excuses. You find reasons, you tell yourself there's nothing there. But the smell hit me next. Rot. Thick, choking. Like something long dead, half sunk in the bog water. Not like the usual damp earth scent of the countryside, not even like a dead animal. This was different. Stronger. Wrong. My stomach turned. My eyes watered. And then I saw it. Just for a second. A shape, low and hunched, just beyond the reach of my torchlight. Black against the blackness, shifting, like it had been lying in the reeds and was just now starting to rise. The only way I can describe it is wrong. Not quite like a human, not quite like anything I could put a name to. The way it moved, slow and deliberate, made my skin crawl. I didn't wait. I ran. My body took over before my brain could argue. I sprinted down that path like my life depended on it. My breath was ragged, my legs burned, but I didn't stop. And behind me, footsteps. Keeping pace. No matter how hard I ran. I could hear them, squelching through the bog, impossibly close. The sound of something wet and heavy, dragging itself forward, never getting any farther away. I hit the main road gasping, my chest tight. The instant my feet touched the road, the feeling vanished. The footsteps stopped. The pressure in the air lifted. It was just gone. I turned, breathless, expecting something to be there at the edge of the bog. But there was nothing. Just reeds. Water. The empty path stretching back into the night. I didn't sleep that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I felt it again. That thing in the reeds, rising up, watching, waiting. The next morning, over breakfast, I told my uncle. Tried to laugh it off, like it was nothing, just a trick of the dark. But he didn't laugh. He didn't even look surprised. He just nodded, real slow, and said, "You're lucky it didn't follow you home." I didn't ask what he meant. I didn't want to know. Maybe he was just having bit of fun at my expense, but I didn't have the nerve to ask what he meant by it. And I still don't think I want to know.
That's it for this episode of Phantom Phone Line. This episode is part of Season 0, featuring dramatized tales of the supernatural. If you have a story to share about something unexplainable, check our website at www.phantomphoneline.com for submission instructions. If you enjoyed tonight's tales, don't forget to subscribe to Phantom Phone Line and share this with a friend who loves the unusual and unexplained. The views and opinions expressed are those of the individuals involved and do not necessarily reflect those of the podcast producers, affiliates, or sponsors. This content is intended for entertainment and informational purposes only and is not a substitute for professional advice or services of any kind. Listeners should exercise caution, seek professional advice if needed, and are encouraged to draw their own conclusions. Viewer listener discretion is advised. Some content may be disturbing, sensitive, or triggering to certain audiences. Any resemblance to actual persons, living or dead, or to real events or locations is purely coincidental. Some parts of this content may feature elements that were created, altered, enhanced, or modified using digital production tools, techniques, or other advanced production methods, including synthetic or automated processes. All content is the property of Phantom Phone Line and may not be reproduced, distributed, or transmitted in any form without prior written consent.